Hey everyone. With the announcement of SharePoint Workflow deprecation, many customers who were on Nintex for SharePoint are preferring to stay on premises for various reasons and are kind of facing a dilemma about their options. We believe that one of the best paths for these customers is to move to K2, which is a much more powerful platform. And that also feels very familiar to the SharePoint users thanks to the out of the box K2 for SharePoint app. This is a short video to just show you how seamless this migration can be, right? So first and foremost, let's start with a bit of a likely concerns that these customers have in their head. First and foremost, it's the user experience. In fact, most of them, they went for Nintex for SharePoint purely because of that experience wherein you have the Nintex app on top of every list and library and the ease in which you can build the forms and workflows. I'm going to touch upon this and show you how you could keep that exact same experience even after moving to K2. The change management, because obviously your employees have got used to raising the request in a certain way. They do not really go out of the SharePoint environment, and within the SharePoint itself, they're able to raise a request, take action on a task, and so on, which you would still be able to do using K2. Feature parity, of course, this is a common concern for everyone who's moving into a new platform. You would want to know if all the features that you have in the current platform are you getting in the new platform as well. In fact, in K2, you will get each and every feature that you have in Index for SharePoint, plus an additional bunch of features which you were lacking in Index for SharePoint. And you would be able to do a lot more than your current platform. Migration complexity, of course, because if you're moving out of one platform, irrespective of any platform that you plan to go, there would be a bit of a migration work. Now, at Nintex, we knew that this is coming soon. So, Nintex has invested heavily and we've come up with a migration tool using which you will be able to reduce the effort of migration into K2 to a large extent. SharePoint integration, I'm sure, is one of the key aspects that all of you would be looking at because if you are on SharePoint, you might possibly want to use the features of SharePoint like updating an item, updating a permission, and so on. I'm going to try and show you the options on that as well. In terms of performance and reliability, the Nintex for SharePoint was predominantly dependent upon the SharePoint underlying technology. Many a times the workflows might fail or workflows may not work as expected, but maybe not for reasons to do with Nintex, but probably for reasons to do with SharePoint, maybe a timer job service was not working or got stuck or whatever that is. In K2, you would not face any of those issues because K2 is a business workflow engine by itself. We've just created this tight integration with SharePoint just for the ease of the users. In terms of integration in Nintex for SharePoint, it was purely on top of SharePoint. Integration with any other platform would have been difficult. You would have had to consider business connectivity services and so on. Whereas in K2, very easily, you will be able to integrate with other technologies in your technology stack. In fact, we have the REST support, SOAP support, we have out of the box connection options for a whole bunch of technology. We also have a K2 SAP Connect, which helps you easily connect to ERPs like SAP and so on. If you have any of those applications which cannot be connected with an API, we also have an out of the box connector for our RPA. And using robotic process automation, you will be able to connect to these disconnected environments as well by just mimicking a human action. And of course, the customization options are a lot more in K2 than on Nintex for SharePoint. So let's look at the difference in which the users would interact with, or what you would have to do to build a workflow process using K2 app on top of SharePoint. So this is your SharePoint environment. You can do this on SharePoint on premises as well as SharePoint online. In my case, I'm going to take on premises as an example. This is a SharePoint subscription edition where I've got this particular list called as leave request. And if I click on new, what you see over here is the SharePoint form, the out of the box SharePoint form. Let's say if I had to change this into an Nintex form, I would be clicking on Nintex forms. And now I'm going to click on the advanced customization because when we are comparing, I think it's always good to do an apple to apple comparison. Advanced customization was the option which allowed you to put in the JavaScript, CSS, and so on. So I'm going to use that option to show you a comparison with K2. Now, most of you who need support for responsive form would possibly be creating these three different forms, one for smartphone, tablet, and so on. Just want to call that loud, just to uh, make the point that it is not the case in K2, and you will be able to do this a lot more easier. Now, let's say if I go and click on publish and close, let's select production, publish, and I'm done. When I click on new, you will see that instead of that default SharePoint form, I can see this classic Nintex for SharePoint form. Now, let's say if I had to do the same thing on K2, let me show you the difference, right? Just like Nintex, in K2 as well, you have an app that sits on top of SharePoint. When I click on new, you can see that this is the default SharePoint form now. If I had to change this into a K2 form, all I have to do is just click on application. That would ask me, what do you want to do on top of K2? I'm going to go ahead and select, say, I need to create a form, a workflow, maybe some reports as well. So I'll just go and select forms. I'll say workflow. I would say this is a leave request workflow. I would want this workflow to be started when the item was added. I'm just going to go and select reports as well. I click on OK, and that's about it. Pretty much the same steps that I did while creating the Nintex for forms. And as soon as this is done, if I go back to my list, if I refresh this page, and if I click on new, you would see that the default SharePoint form has been converted into a K2 form. Exact same number of steps that I had to do this to achieve in Nintex for SharePoint. Now let's look at the difference, right? So if I go back to my Nintex forms, most of you would know that if you had to create a integration, this had to be within the SharePoint list, and it was tightly coupled with one SharePoint list. Moving items into different SharePoint lists and so on, then you would have to do those customizations and stuff. Whereas that gets a lot more easier on K2. Very easily, you would be able to build that smart objects, create a view, and just add that into a form. Similarly, if I had to go to rules, let's say if I had to put in a very simple rule like the end date should not be greater than the start date, the validation, the formatting options were kind of, I wouldn't say was limited, but I'm just going to show you the options that you have in K2, and you would see that it is a lot more. And for the reasons for which you were building JavaScripts all this while, you wouldn't have had to do that. You would be very able to do that using rules in K2. So let me show you the comparison now. So let's say if I go back to cancel, if I go to application, and let's say if I go to forms, let's give it a second there. That's my form. I click on new form, and you can see that it is taking me to the K2 designer. Now, anything I want to do, I can do it over here. As soon as I click on save, it gets updated in SharePoint. And you can see this, there are a lot more options on the controls that I can use in the form, even the reporting, the charting options. Like even if I have to change some style profile, I could always reuse the work that I've done. I can create a style profile. Let's say, for example, I've just created the style profile. I'll click on save. Let me check that out first. I click on save. And now if I go and refresh my page, and if I click on new, you can see that the style profile is already added onto my SharePoint. It's as simple as that. We were talking about rules. If you go into rules, you can see the options that you have are a lot more granular. You can literally select the event when you want this rule to be triggered, uh, like when the server loads a form or a view or a sub view, or when a control raises an event and so on. Once you've selected an event, you get equally detailed conditional options And once you've selected the conditions, you have all these actions options which are available straight out of the box. So you wouldn't have to go and do anything custom, because pretty much anything and everything that you may want to do it on the form, you will be able to achieve using out of the box options. That was a very quick overview on the forms. Now let's look at the workflows as well, right? Let's say if I had the same form over here, and if I had to create a workflow. So whenever I add a new request, I need the status to be changed or maybe assign a task. I would have had to click on Nintex for workflow, create a list workflow. That would bring me to the design canvas. Let's say if I had to update an item, I'm just going to go and look for update item. I'll drag and drop into this place here. I'll configure it. I'm going to say the current item, the status, and I will say is under review. For example, right? I'm just going to click on save. I will go to workflow settings and I will just set it up to be triggered when the item is added. Where is that? When the item is created, yes, I'll click on save. I'm going to click on publish. I'll say this is the new workflow, submit, and I'm done. Now, what this will do is you can see it in action right away. When I go to my list, I'm just going to give it a refresh there. I'll click on new and I'm going to say, let's say this is the leave request. Start date is equal to maybe 8th of October, end date is 10th. Let's say vacation, click on save. And if I give it a refresh there, you will see that this item creation would have triggered the workflow and the status over here will change to under review. Let's say if I had to do exactly same thing on K2 as well, I will go to my K2 list, just like what I did in Nintex workflow. I would go to my K2 app and select the workflow. There you go. Oh, it's open in another tab. I think that's here. So let me just close this. I'll click on close. Now let's say if I had to update this item, I have to do exact same steps. I look for the smart object that I need to update. So let's say if I go into my SharePoint 2013, Apex follow list, that's leave request K2, drag and drop the smart object, which is the list. The method is update an item because that is what I need to do. I'll select the IDs. So that's the ID and the status. ID is a unique identifier which tells the K2 which particular item in the SharePoint list you need to update. So I'll drag and drop the ID. I'm going to say this is under review. Once that is done, I'll add an end workflow, drag and drop, complete that loop over there and click on deploy. Now, if I go back to my list and if I add a new request, so let's say if I click on new, I'm going to do, let's say this is the leave request, start date is equal to 8th, end date is, let's say 9th, leave type is annual, click on save. Now you will see that this action would have triggered the workflow. And when I click on refresh, the status has been updated to under review. So it's pretty much the same experience. If I could just go back and show you, even if you have to assign a task, you could simply go and look for assign a task, and very similar to what you've been using in Nintex for SharePoint. You can configure your actions or outcome. You can configure the form. In fact, in K2, you can even reuse your initial form as a task form and manage it using rules, which is a great advantage because let's say if you have like 1000 forms and if you had to update a certain field or maybe change the branding, if you make changes in one form and you could apply to all 1000 forms at one shot. This was something which was not possible in Index for SharePoint. You would have had to individually go and open the initial form and the task form and make those updates. So those things gets a lot more easier when it comes to K2. But for the things like customizing notification email reminders, configuring on how do you want to take action on an outcome. You have all those options in K2 as well, right? So this was the initial concerns of the user experience, change management, feature parity. All of these could be taken care very well. In fact, what we are proposing is a lot more powerful than what you have been using today. Now, I'm sure one of the biggest concerns that you have would be the migration. What do we do about the migration? Now, one thing to note is, irrespective of any technology that you take, you will have to do a rework on the migration or to move your current workflows into a newer technology. But at Nintex, we knew that this is coming way before. We have invested on a migration tool. With the migration tool, your migration would be as simple as this. So let's say I'm just going to go back to this particular slide and give you a quick glimpse of how this works. What you would have had to do is you will go into the list settings, workflow settings, export your current Nintex for SharePoint workflow. So I've just gone into a Nintex for SharePoint workflow. I'm just going to click on that export button and then I will be able to export the workflows into a folder. I could also do this using PowerShell scripts if you have like multiple workflows to be exported at the same time. Once that is done, when you go into your K2 app, you will have an option over here under the admin to import these workflows. So all you have to do just to go and click on import K2 workflows. That comes up with this user interface wherein you will be uploading these zip files and then K2 migration app will convert these Nintex for SharePoint into a K2 workflow. Now, one thing to note is it is being built or it is developed to just help in the migration process. It is not 100% migration by using the tool. So if it is a simple workflow, most of the actions, almost all of the actions would be migrated. But if it is a super complex workflows, at least what you would see is that the effort that you're putting in migration would be a lot less. Because what you will get eventually is all the workflows in the K2. And then when you open a workflow, you will be able to see at least the structure of it. And then all you have to do is just go and fix those small fixes that you need to do based on the current K2 environment. So that was a very, very quick overview of the option that you have to move from Nintex for SharePoint to a new platform, in this case, which is K2. Thank you for watching.